There we go. All right. Um, I guess I'll make sure you can see me. Okay. So we're just going over the homework for 7. Um, you have a somewhat long lecture about cognitive biases and different cognitive systems for next time. So I'll give you plenty of time for that today. Um, all right. So starting off with question 1. This is retrograde amnesia. So anytime if this guy gets a concussion and then he couldn't remember anything that he'd previously done in that day, the day that he got the concussion, that would be retrograde because he previously had memories that he has now lost, right? Um, that's the opposite of interrograde amnesia, right? Which is where you lose the ability to form new memories. And that's what's going on in the second one here. If he couldn't remember new people's names, that would be losing the ability to form new memories. So that would be interrograde. This first couple are fairly easy. Um, question 3. If Carl could remember all 50 state capitals at one time because he memorized it for a school assignment, but now he's just lost some of them, he can't remember all of them. That would be transience. Transience is just losing our memory over time, especially memories that we don't access on a regular basis, that we don't refresh. We will often just find that they fade away over time. Question 4. This is absent-mindedness. So, um, the key thing here is that Mikhail wasn't listening. Anytime you are not paying attention when you would have encoded the relevant memory, and so it therefore was never encoded in the first place, um, that would be absent-mindedness because you never actually had this memory that you think you might have had, right? Um, so this is a little different from misattribution, which is where we have the memory, but the context of the memory is wrong, right? I think this will come up again a little bit. But yeah, absent-mindedness, you don't even have the memory in the first place because you weren't paying attention when you would have put the memory down. All right, question 5 is bias. One of the tricky things about bias is there's a bunch of different cognitive biases that affect memory. So bias is kind of a catch-all here. So if Luke recalled more good details about his chosen school than about the alternatives, that is bias. It's a kind of choice supportive bias. So we tend to remember details about choices that we've made that make sense of our choices, make our choices seem like they were rational at the time. And we tend to leave out other possibilities, other things that our memory leaves out other choices we might have made or the reasons for those other choices. Question 6 is also bias. This is a kind of consistency bias. So, like I've said in previous contexts, we have an innate tendency to want to be consistent over time, to be the kind of person who is rational and who acts for good principles. Um, and this doesn't always square with our actual behavior. So, if we think of ourselves in a certain way now, we will be more likely to remember past events which conform with our current self-image as opposed to past events which do not conform with that self-image. Question 7 is suggestibility. So here, um, Justin has kind of a vague memory of visiting a particular neighborhood. But this vague memory is filled in by his friend who lists the names of several possible neighborhoods. Anytime when you have a vague memory, which is filled in with outside information that was not originally part of that experience you went through, that's what suggestibility is. And I brought up in the lecture that this is a particular danger when it comes to police interrogations, where police will often suggest to you specifics about what you might have done or what happened or what you witnessed um, when your memory about it is vague. And the problem is you can trick yourself into thinking that those details that they're suggesting are actually true. This even leads some people in like some situations where they're under a lot of extreme stress to come to think that they committed crimes that they never actually committed. Question 8. This is blocking. So, the fact that she's able to search her memory and realize that it was Elizabeth eventually means that the information was in there somewhere. It was just not readily accessible to her conscious mind. And there are a lot of memories we might have that like are not readily accessible, but if we really searched our minds, we'd be able to get to them, right? Usually, the experience of blocking, when we sort of clear the block and we end up figuring out what did I remember about this thing. Usually, we have this experience of relief. Um, so, yeah, that's blocking. Question 9. This is misattribution. Or sorry, blocking. It's not misattribution. Okay, so this is really tricky. This one is really tricky. So I mentioned in the lecture that there is a phenomenon with a French name, right? That a lot of cognitive psychologists think is caused by blocking, and that phenomenon is called déjà vu. Its converse, jamais vu, is also potentially a kind of blocking. So déjà vu is where you experience a new situation but it appears to be something about it appears to be really familiar to you. So you have a new experience, but it seems like you've been here before, or it seems like you've talked to this person before, or it seems like um, this whole thing seems familiar. But one possible explanation for déjà vu is that there is some similarity between your current experience and some past experience you've had, but your conscious mind is not able to access that similarity, right? So the reason why this is not misattribution is because he came to think that he must have been at this job site before, but he can't put his finger on exactly what it is about this job site that seems familiar to him. So for misattribution, you have the actual specific memory, but the context in which that memory was formed is wrong, right? Here, he's kind of got the opposite. He's got the context. The context seems similar to him, but he does not have the specific memory, right? Um, so the thing that he's unable to access with his conscious mind is that there's very similar lighting here. Um, if this was misattribution, it would need to be that he knew the lighting was similar, or he knew that this, or if he was trying to remember what was similar, or what the lighting was, and he remembered the lighting in this other place as the lighting he worked with at the job site. That would be like the right memory. He's got access to the memory, but not the context surrounding the memory. So again, because this is a kind of déjà vu, blocking is the best choice here. Okay. Um, Question 10 is persistence. Um, Anytime we have a memory that we can't seem to stop from recurring in our conscious mind, where we can't forget it and it causes us a lot of distress, this is what persistence is, right? It's kind of the opposite of transience. Transience allows us to forget things, persistence does not. And our minds are capable of both, right? Um, Sometimes transience is bad because we want to remember things that happened in the past that are good and we forget them. But then sometimes persistence is good. We get the same thing, right? We can not forget these good experiences, but oftentimes it's also bad experiences that we also can't forget, right? This is a big element of PTSD where people go through a traumatic experience and then they often find themselves reliving that experience just because of the trauma associated with it, right? Question 11 is misattribution. So here, Carol is remembering the detail correctly that there was some high school mascot, which was the Hornet. But what she can't access or doesn't have anymore is the context surrounding that detail, right? She, instead of thinking that it's her own, or sorry, instead of thinking that it was hers, right? She should be thinking that it's her daughter's high school mascot. Um, so the example I used in the lecture was of Ronald Reagan, who later in his life, when he was developing Alzheimer's, while he was still the president, by the way, he was developing Alzheimer's, and he did not. He would often tell people these stories about his experiences liberating prisoners in the in World War II prisoner war camps. Um, and but this experience was not one that he had the right context for, because Ronald Reagan was never actually in Europe during the war. He was a kind of propaganda officer, and his job was to make films that depicted these events. So he remembered doing these things, but the context was wrong. He remembered the actual uh, events, even though he didn't actually experience them. Instead, the actual context was his movies, right? Question 12. This is a bias. This is a kind of hindsight bias. So, hindsight bias is our tendency to think of the past as inevitable, to think of events in the past which occurred as always having been fated to be that way. When in fact, a lot of the things that happened in the past, just as things that happen in the future, are random, are caused by things that are just totally unaccountable, are caused by forces that we weren't even aware of at the time. Um, and so, especially for games of chance like roulette, there really was just as much chance that it would come up red as that it would come up black. But this really seems like it must have been black, right? Um, yeah. Okay, going on to 13. 13 is bias. So the tricky thing here is why I would say it's not blocking, right? Is that this is a kind of context bias, which is one of the biases I mentioned in the lecture, right? If we find it easier to remember a particular piece of information in one context as opposed to another, um, that's what context bias is. Um, this isn't quite blocking because in one context he's able to easily recall the punchlines, and in another context he's not. Maybe it could be kind of context specific blocking, right? But the real source of the problem here is the context in which he's trying to recall the jokes. Now, blocking this particular kind of bias, this context bias, is one of the reasons why people recommend that you take practice tests, like um, if you're going to take the LSAT or the MCAT or the GRE to go into grad school. Um, you will probably have to take a bunch of practice tests to make sure you do well on the actual exam. And psychologists usually recommend that you take the exam or the practice exams in a very similar environment to the one that you're actually going to be taking the actual test in. Because you may find that if you are in a totally new environment, you have a harder time remembering the stuff you have to remember in the moment, right? That's why, like, a lot of these tests you can take at home now, just through with a webcam and a proctor who's watching your computer. Um, that's probably better, I think, than going to a testing center to do it. Okay, 14. This one is transience. Lily could remember the episodic memory of the first time she was taught to tie her shoes, but eventually she can't recall it. She just lost that information over time because it wasn't particularly relevant. It wasn't a memory that she wanted to recall or that was worth recalling. And we just lose our memory over time. Finally, question 15 is suggestibility. So here, if you have a vague memory that they were wearing some kind of dress, but we don't remember the color, and somebody lists a few possible colors, and she came to believe it was red. Um, that's suggestibility. We have a vague memory that's being filled in by outside information, right? Okay. Any questions about homework 7? There are a couple that like almost everybody missed, and I admit they're kind of difficult questions. Okay, like I said, this is going to be a very short day, but I do want to do one more thing, which is a little quizzes game. I'll give you 5 questions. So I've got a quizzes game here on Sins of Memory. Go ahead and join. It's joinmyquiz.com, 918-386. All right, let's go ahead and get started. So just 5 questions. Like I gave you like a minute on all these, but I don't anticipate they will all take a minute. Okay. Good job, Tim, Mackay, and Abigail. This is transients. So, if Sam could remember for a long time the name of his best friend in third grade, but he's now just completely lost that information, that would be transients, losing memory over time because it hasn't been accessed in a while. This would not be absent-mindedness because this would absent-mindedness would require Sam to have not known his best friend's name back in third grade. Remember that absent-mindedness requires that you not be paying attention when the memory would have been encoded. So later on, you don't have that memory available. If he's completely lost the information, also blocking would not be the right choice because blocking is where you have the information, but it's not consciously accessible for whatever reason. Next one. Okay. So if Carrie met Bob at this conference and learned his name, but then saw him the next week and wasn't able to recall it, um, but she had the information in there somewhere, um, that would be blocking, right? Um, I can see why some people might have said suggestibility for this, which is like he's kind of reminding her. Um, but Suggestibility is where you fill in a vague memory with false information, and presumably he's not giving her a false name. This could be suggestibility if he told her his name was like Jason or something, something totally different, right? But yeah, she just doesn't have access to the information, even though it's in there somewhere. Next one. Okay, good. So this is suggestibility. It's very similar to the example I gave in the lecture, right? Um, if he's being intensely questioned in front of Congress for his role in this crime, and then he comes to believe he was guilty, even though he was innocent, this is suggestibility. It's like he may not have known, he may have vague memories of how he was involved, but the through the intense questioning, comes to believe that a bunch of specifics which suggest he was actually involved to the extent that he was guilty, right? Um, so let's see. I would not say this is misattribution because it's not like he what comes to believe something that was true, but not true in the that was correct, like a detail that was correct, but not in the right context, right? Here he's coming to believe something completely false, um, because it fills in maybe a vague piece of information he had previously, and also due to the intense nature of the questioning, right? Intense interrogation can cause people to think that they did things they didn't do, right? Next one. Okay, good. Most people got this was misattribution. Lucas is earnestly telling this story as though it happened to him. This actually happens sometimes where people come to think, oh, this happened to me, when in fact, it actually happened to somebody else that they know. Especially when the event in question is a long time in the past. It's hard to know, like, did that happen to me or did that happen to my friend? Right? You may not have enough details to suss out who it happened to exactly. And so you may end up believing it happened to you and it happened to your friend. Um, that the information is correct, but the context is wrong. That is, this kind of thing happened, but who did it happen to? It may not have been you. All right, last one. Tilda has joined us here. Okay. This one is absent-mindedness. So Steve's mother told him to remember to do the dishes, but he wasn't paying attention. So he didn't encode that memory in the first place, and therefore couldn't remember it when it came time to remember it. Right? That's what absent-mindedness is. So this isn't simple transience because he never actually got the information into his head in the first place. He wasn't paying attention. Right? It's also not suggestibility because it's not like somebody else suggested, "Oh, what did your mom tell you you're supposed to do?" "Oh, I think it was watch TV." And then he comes to think, "Oh yeah, I was supposed to watch TV." Right? Okay, so those are all the questions I have for you guys. Let's see who did the best here. Abigail, nice job. Ali and Amelia as well. Good job. Okay. Um, any questions about coming back to homework 7? Anything in lecture 7? You feel like you got it? Well, let me mention a few things about next time. So next time you only have one homework assignment for lecture 8. But the lecture is somewhat long. It's about an hour long, so there's a lot of content in it. So I think I'm going to turn you loose and have you work on that. And remember that you have your fallacies paper coming due on Sunday at 11:59 p.m. So I'll mention it again tomorrow to remind you. But yeah, that's the other important thing. All right, guys. Well, that's all I had to cover for today. So please uh, have a great day, and I will see you tomorrow.
Hey, Professor, I have a question.
Yeah.
Am I able to